G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day and so far you are also having a brilliant weekend. Now legends, my appointments yesterday went well and next week we'll be stepping into a little bit more treatment to see if we can improve my response to chemotherapy. Now legends, today as always, of course, we have a lot to go over. Of course, I will be showing you the maps. We will be then comparing maps and I have some geolocations to show you as well. And we need to talk about some strikes where then catastrophically there have been a lot of civilians caught up in those as well. And then we need to talk about what is occurring between Russia and America and Ukraine and America and Europe. You can see the one country there we mentioned a lot. What is actually happening here and the sunken cost fallacy of protracted war. We will talk at length about that. How countries in war, they give so much. They are trying to chase their losses, much like a gambling addict. And that will then go into my predictions for what we're going to see about the future of this war. Will it end or will it continue? Legends, you might remember me saying that the informational space is getting nastier and nastier by the day, and every day that passes, sadly, the internet can actually get more and more dangerous. We see bloggers' personal data getting leaked, and this is proof that things are getting even worse, and you don't have to be an internet personality to be at risk. Right now, your personal data is likely being bought and sold online. Data brokers, they collect it, scammers exploit it, and hackers, they're just waiting for the right moment when the walls are down. Everything from your home address, your social security number, phone number, financial details, this could be exposed. And once it's out there, it's very, very difficult where to start to get it removed. That is, unless you use today's video sponsor, Aura. Aura is your all-in-one digital security solution. Their data broker removal tool helps wipe your personal information from any shady databases and show you where it is also. They also offer credit monitoring to keep you ahead of any potential threats. You'll get real-time mobile alerts if your data is leaked and private online with, of course, their VPN, a virtual private network, and you can keep your kids safe online as well with a number of parental controls. I use Aura and I recommend to all my friends, anyone online, that they do as well. So don't leave yourself exposed to data breaches. Head over to the sponsor of this video at the link below, aura.com/WillyOAM, and you'll receive a 14-day free trial and find out if any of your data has already been compromised. Thank you, Aura, for sponsoring this video. Legends, where we will start today is we will start on the maps. I'll give you a bit of a treat. I know some people like it in the start, some people like it at the end. You can't please everyone. Now, legends, I'm not sure if I did show you or not, but if I didn't, then we'll make sure we do. I just have this graph here, and this gives us the kilometre square changes. And I'm not sure if I had shown you that War Mappers, they released, and AMK, he also released, and these are very close. So given my comparison of maps, this figure around the 270 square kilometres is what we will go with for then the month of March, which shows an increase from the month prior and an increase from the same month, of course, the year then before. So it shows increase in the same conditions and momentum on the battlefield is fairly steady given that. But of course, what we needed to speak about is that doesn't include Kursk, where there are then a lot of square kilometre changes. Now, legends, let's actually then have a look on the map. Of course, we have Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, purple since 2014. And where we'll come is we'll then come into Sumy and Kursk. Now, on this map, of course, this doesn't show where Ukraine was at points in here. It doesn't show where it has moved forward and backwards because this would show drastically different. But we do see a large change in this map today. So if we go back to then the 3rd being yesterday, we see an increase in grey zone from Novinky all the way to Basivkia up to here, which is a large increase in this. Let's measure it as quickly as we can, about a 6 kilometre change in grey zone there. Remember, we have been talking about this Russian cross into then Sumy. and the threat that these then 5 crossings, these 5 axes, do put on areas such as Yanakivka, as well as this road leading into then Suja and the remaining areas that Ukraine hold. This is then confirmed off both Suryak maps and AMK mapping. So we see this Suryak map today. Remember, he showed this movement for some time. The Russian army took full control over the locality of Basivka in Sumy. So he's saying that that has been occupied, Sumy here, now shown in grey zone. Remember, time and time again, for the past years we've been doing this. Deep State has shown something grey, Suryak has shown it red, or Suryak shows it red, then it will go grey on Deep State, and then eventually it will go red check. So again, just wait out for confirmation on that, but time and time again, that is what has occurred. Let's have a look then at AMK mapping. You can follow him on these links here, that Russian forces continued to advance in the Yanakivka direction of Sumy Oblast and then captured the village of Basivkia. So this area in here, he's showing that as well, saying that it's a 3.2 kilometer square advance for Russia. Remember, he already showed that there was movement south of the border in that direction. So we'll pick up out of this area and we'll continue in the northeast and we'll come down to the Dovrichnia Kamyanka front. Remember, between the 2nd and the 3rd, just south of Petrivka, we saw an increase in grey zone, but we're going to be looking just north of there in Kamyanka today, because we then see a Suryak map update. Northeastern front, Russian army entered Kamyanka, taking control over some parts of the southern part of the locality. So a crossing across the Oskil here into Kamyanka, not confirmed on this map, but as I've been saying, keep an eye on this, because we are seeing then a lot of trickle-in changes around this front line, confirmed by some of the grey zone as well. And it's very worth just keeping an eye on this, especially if what we're hearing that Russia's going to launch a major offensive. I wouldn't be surprised to see some then increase in actions on this front line, maybe not to make ground, but to draw forces into here. Now, we'll continue moving our way then down the maps, and we come through, and of course we have Terny, where we see this spire heading out in the direction of Katerinivka, confirmed on this map. But we see a lot of grey zone in this sector, and this is AMK mapping talking about this. Now, what we need to look for on this map, the easiest way to do it is look where the tree lines are. So we see these 2 tree lines here, these are these 2, and as well this one heading up on the northwest. So in this sector in here, to the north of Nolevobivka, then it says that the Russian forces have then expanded their bridgehead on the western bank of then the Zedebets, then controlling another 2 kilometers squared in this direction. Remember, a lot of grey zone in here. It's difficult to get an idea exactly how this is looking. Now, we'll continue to move our way down until we get to, of course, Toretsk. Now, Toretsk is very difficult to know what exactly is happening in here. But what we can see from this map is Deep State is confirming, a Ukrainian map is confirming a Russian gain to the north of Toretsk. Now, I have seen other mappers sharing that Deep State showed this in here, where the oval is, as then red check. But when I go back and forward, I can't see that. So maybe they've updated and changed in a day. I don't know. But that's remaining grey zone for myself. I don't have a map update on that from Suryak or AMK today. So we'll continue moving our way down, and then we get into this Alexandropil front, where, of course, Suryak is showing that this has moved out across this road in here, and this map did show the other day that they have made it up to this road, they being the Russian forces in this case. We do have then an AMK mapping map in here, and he shows then similar to what Suryak maps is showing. So this road around in here, this is here. So he is also saying that Russian forces have then occupied Alexandropil and are moving out across this road, with Ukrainian forces to the south of here, with that main service route being cut off, this being then 4.9 kilometers in favour of the Russian forces. Now, we'll continue moving our way down on this map. Of course, we have the Pokrovsk front, not much going on in here, but if we then turn on the red check for yesterday, we can see around Andreevkia, there is a lot of red check on this front line. Remember, a lot of maps showing significant more advancement than this. You can also see Rozliv still has this island of the teleported Russian soldiers onto that direction. So just keep an eye on that. We'll get a better idea over a period of time of how this is actually looking on this front line. And then we come to Velika Novosilka, and then we want to look for Vesely. Now I have a geolocated flag today. So what we're looking at is this circle right here, which is at the end of this road right here. That is where the flag went up. Now, what we know is that there is a fortification just to the south of Vesely. But as we can see, even from Deep State's own map, the Russians have just moved simply on the eastern side of this waterway and have then hooked around on that. And this is then the geolocated footage. Remember, with any of this footage, you can go and watch it in length on then my Telegram channel, which the link is then below. And that is what this is geolocated off. Now, we'll move our way down into the south. Now remember, there's a lot of changes in the south. We know that there is geolocated of a Russian flag going up right where my cursor is, Syriac showing different, but we can see on the Deep State today to the west of Lobkove that there is a confirmed Russian advancement of some 500 meters in the direction between Kamyatsky and Lobkove. Again, just like in the extreme northeast, in the extreme south here, keep an eye out on this front. This may be one of the areas where Russia choose to push. Now, I mentioned in the very beginning of this video, we have seen a lot of strikes overnight, a lot of drones going both ways as well as missiles, and it is absolutely horrible. It's catastrophic any time that civilians are caught up in these strikes, or that civilians are caught up in air defense, then hitting these strikes and being injured as well or killed. It is a horrible, horrible part of war, and all then lengths should be taken to try and reduce or cut out then civilian casualties in war. I know it's a part of war, but it is a horrible part that no one should be cheering on. And I'm constantly disgusted when I'm going through Russian pages or Ukrainian pages. If it is the wrong civilians, then it is celebrated. It is absolutely horrible. And if you do that, you have no place in my fucking channel, my Telegram. You're a piece of shit. Civilians are civilians at the end of the day. But what you do know is that I talk about strategically important items that can change the nature of bits and pieces on the front line. And the strike overnight that I found very interesting was this one here. Now, this is against the Saransk optics systems being hit by a Ukrainian drone. Now, this is the only center in Russia that produces fiber optics. Now, a lot of people are saying now Russia will not be able to operate fiber optically controlled drones. Where we see the majority of Russian strikes, at least what I see of drones, are from those fiber optics. They have overtaken their radio controlled drones very quickly. They've surpassed that. But in this, I don't think we'll see much of a change. Given the cost of fiber optics for drones just on Alibaba, I would assume that most of Russia's fiber optics are imported from China. With any strikes like this, we always take the wait to see a result approach. And if we see changes, then we can, of course, then see the result of this strike. And if we don't, well, we see the result of this strike. So the diplomacy around this war, I often refer to as impossible diplomacy, because where the sides are sitting is just so far apart, and to try and mediate any of this is very difficult. And the longer war goes on, the more and more difficult that actually becomes, because like a gambling addict, you're trying to win back the losses that you have made. And this is the sunken cost fallacy of protracted war. And we're going to go over all of that and my predictions as well at what American officials have said. So Marco Rubio has then put this on his X account. We need less talk and more action. Europe must develop concrete proposals on security arrangements for the Ukrainian people. Now, regardless of what you think of Marco Rubio, he's not lying. He is correct here. Europe, they have lots of meetings, and as I will call them, hand-shandy-a-thons with each other, with Zelensky. But what forward movement towards security arrangements, increased then defense, is actually being done? And like we said, wait and see for the results approach. What in that are we actually seeing as tangible results on the front line? Europe's having a lot of meetings. changes very, very slowly. And as we know, there's a lot of talk about boots on the ground. Starmer and Macron love to mention this. But what they don't love to mention is that this requires a peace, at least a ceasefire, and it requires the US as a backstop, which we know the US has no appetite for their own soldiers to be on the ground. And what these states who talk about boots on the ground, what they haven't even thought about yet is what is their actions on for kinetic action. What is their response? What is their response if a Russian shell comes in? What do they do? What do they do if the Ukrainian colleague beside them fires a mortar into the Russian lines? What do they do then? And no real security guarantees are being presented without the US as a backstop. These are sovereign independent states. They love to let you know this, but they're not willing to do it without the US and their backing. Now, there is little appetite to end this war. Ukraine fighting on, this weakens Russia, and a ceasefire, we have seen the Baltics say that threatens them. But the war on the other side, this continues to create division within the EU and NATO, so China and Russia benefit from that too. So as I see it, the appetite to actually end the war at the highest levels of government, it really isn't there. Because a lot of people are looking at what benefits us the most, not what benefits the people involved in the conflict itself. And historically, that's how war always is. But let's step back just a little bit and look at some comments that Marco Rubio has made as well over the past 24 hours. The US will know within weeks whether Russia is serious about pursuing peace with Ukraine. The Secretary of State has said, warning that Donald Trump was not going to fall into the trap of endless negotiations. We're testing to see if the Russians are interested in peace. Their actions, not their words, their actions will determine whether they are serious or not. And we intend to find out sooner rather than later. He added that Vladimir Putin and the Russians will have to make a decision about whether they're serious about peace or not. If it's a delay tactic, Trump's not interested in that. We will know soon enough, in a matter of weeks, not months, whether Russia is serious about peace or not. He's also said that the Ukrainians have shown a willingness to enter, for example, into complete ceasefire. But on the reverse of this, we also need to look and see that does Russia feel that the US is serious about peace? Are they serious about peace based on the situation on the battlefield right now, or are they serious about peace on an idealistic wish list that is presented through mostly the European states? Are they serious in peace given the situation right now? But a bigger question gets flashed in my head when I see this. When I see, is Russia interested in peace? Trump's not interested in lengthening the war. The question that gets flashed in my head is, what if Putin says no? What happens then? If Putin just says, no, I'm lengthening the war, what then occurs? Let's step back just a little bit to set the stage of what is happening right now. So we have Zelensky's tone has shifted 180 degrees from being ceasefire only benefits Russia to open to a complete ceasefire. Zelensky is massively criticising Putin, of course, for then wanting to prolong the conflict. Then America, they are also criticising Putin to delay this. And Putin, he does continue to delay ceasefire agreements. I think that is very obvious. Ukrainian commanders over the past week, they are raising a lot of concerns, suggesting that Russia may be preparing a significant offensive across the whole front line in many different directions. In the same week, we see Putin noting that there are reasons to believe we will finish them off. So, I agree that Putin is stalling. And this stalling technique, this strategy, it makes sense given the desperation we see around wanting ceasefire and peace. If we see that combined with what then military actions are being told that are coming in the future, it tells us that the situation may be deteriorating. And if it is, and if it is deteriorating to be in Russia's favour, I can see why he is stalling that as a tactic, as a strategy on the front line. And we'll talk more about that. Because, as I said, this stalling makes sense. Now, I'm not saying, therefore, I justify stalling a ceasefire or peace. What I'm saying is it can make sense in this. And it makes sense when we ask the forbidden question. If Putin says no, if he says no to ceasefires, no to peace, given the terms, what happens then? Of course, we hear from people that have no idea how the world actually works that Putin should just withdraw his forces. Okay, what if he doesn't? I want to be a millionaire. You can give me $1 million. But if you don't, what happens then? It literally has the same basis as that. The idea that Putin should just withdraw his forces, you may be correct, but what does that actually do? What happens if he just says no, and what happens if he just doesn't withdraw the forces? Because I think the Kremlin, with high confidence, they assess that Trump, that he has no appetite to increase aid to Ukraine and that he can just wait out that US patience. And given the short-term American economic reset that we have seen take place in the past 48 hours, that I believe the US has no appetite to decrease oil prices further, as well as the risk of pushing China, India and Russia closer together and potentially de-dollarizing too. So I think that a lot of this has presented Putin the opportunity to say, well, I'll just delay a little bit further. And if I continue to delay, it doesn't matter what people say, I may end up in a better position, in a further position of power. Media, bloggers, news, politicians, they want you to be of the idea that Russia doesn't want peace. This is incorrect. Russia was and has been open to peace throughout the war, but they are not open to the peace requirements that the West expects or has presented. So they're open to peace on their terms, just like Ukraine is open to peace on their terms. They're not open to Russia's terms. Russia's not open to Ukraine or the West's terms. Russia has paid an immense price for this war. It is in their interest to end the war. So just saying that Putin just wants to continue war for war's sake is just as ridiculous as that Putin should withdraw his forces. It's immensely costly and can threaten everything back home as well. By painting Russia as just this warmongering orc, you actually then just disregard any real analysis of the war and the situation and the diplomacy behind the scenes. It is in their interest to end the war, but they will not end on disadvantageous terms. Of course, while they hold an advantageous position. We know this because Ukraine is trying to get themselves into an advantageous position so they have advantageous terms. The country that is in the advantageous position is not going to accept disadvantageous terms. Now, this is where we get into the problem and the impossible diplomacy I refer to. Protracted war, the sunken cost entrapment, or the sunken cost fallacy it's often referred to. But simply, the more a state has sacrificed in lives, in resources, in political capital, the less willing it is to accept a peace deal that doesn't seem to justify those losses. This leads to the war termination theory of how incurred costs affect a state's willingness to settle and under what terms. So the higher cost that they have paid, the higher price that they will demand in settlement, regardless of the shifting strategic reality. And what Zelensky is saying is the cost that we have paid, that is not equal to then Putin taking this amount of ground, and Putin, the cost that we have paid is not equal to Ukraine then joining onto NATO. This is the sunken cost fallacy. This is why I believe we are probably further away from the end of the war than we think. Zelensky and Putin, they correctly see this war as existential for the future of their state. The losses incurred through combat and immigration with demographic crisis that is in both Russia and Ukraine play a foundational role in the future of both of their states, and of course the willingness for then international trade and relations following also, and in Ukraine's case, getting millions of people back into the country. So let's go then a step further. Given what we have presented, what do I believe will happen? Now, firstly, I cannot understand Zelensky's ongoing manpower paradox. He's not willing to lower the mobilisation age from 25, although continuing to have manpower problems. Especially from an optics point of view of how does the US see this? He's telling Trump, telling the world that the war is existential. Yet what America is seeing is that Ukraine is not willing to then lower their troop conscription down to 18. So acting as if it is not existential, although we, of course, know that it is. And I think the way America see this is very, very concerning too. I can't see that paradox in any form of positive note. And we know this is a big sticking point, a lot more than the media will present for US-Ukraine relations. Now, secondly, you need to have a real assessment of the battlefield. Whose goals are closer and whose goals are more realistic and easier for Trump to achieve and end the war. Now, Putin is primarily requesting that Ukraine not join NATO, that he then occupies and walks away with the 4 oblasts plus Crimea, of which he occupies, off war mappers numbers, 69% of Donetsk, 99% of Luhansk, 72% of Zap, and around 58% of Kherson. He also wants sanctions lifted. What Zelensky, on the other side, is requesting is NATO or the equivalent security guarantees, with a risk of going kinetic if things don't end. He wants then military power given to him in the form of military aid to the amount that could liberate these territories. Again, link back into the manpower paradox, but anyway, the amount of aid given to be able to then push through militarily. He wants the Russian leaders prosecuted and that Russian assets that are frozen to then be unfrozen, given to Ukraine and rebuild the country. That's not enough money to rebuild Ukraine. So then further reparations from the Russian Federation. Now, leave out of this what you think is moral, ethical, right, just. You need to leave that out if you want to analyse the question that I posed. Whose goals are closer and what is more easy for Trump to achieve? Not having Ukraine in NATO for Trump is easy. He just says no NATO rather than going through accepting NATO and these occupied territories of which Ukraine will say that they will never accept. Well, it's far easier for Trump to draw a line than go back to then his party, who has no appetite for the continuation of this, to then present a plan to push through on these militarily and risk further escalation too. So, given that Russia is obviously closer to achieving its goals while having the initiative on the front line, it makes sense that Putin will drag out negotiations on the idea that he will be able to achieve better results from America's impatience and fear of wider escalation with a nuclear power. That America, they'll grow more and more impatient and they fear that wider war. We know that. And eventually Putin's saying that I'll probably get then a better deal. Now, this calculation can change drastically due to a few things. One, if Ukraine isn't launching an informational campaign at the moment regarding it saying that Russia is about to launch in the coming weeks a massive offensive across the front line, that can change all this calculation very quickly. Also, it changes drastically if the, quote, imminent Russian economic collapse is actually imminent. Now, of course, it's been imminent for 3 and a bit years now, but if it is actually imminent and we see then things really shift there, that changes things a lot. But we can't predict the future. Although, using common sense, we've been able to predict a lot. Now, my predictions are this. Given the war termination theory that I presented earlier, the costs for Russia and Ukraine and what they have suffered and their positions being so far apart, we won't see then a clean end to this or a ceasefire that is lasting. I think that we'll see a continued grinding war of attrition. The ultimate outcome of a war of attrition like this is that Russia, they'll have reduced global influence and they'll have then an increased reliance on China. China have a lot to benefit from that. On the other side, Ukraine, of course, will risk demographic collapse. Russia has demographic issues too. We're not discounting that, but Ukraine will risk a demographic collapse. And within the century, by 2100, that their population could shrink to under 10 million. Now, I can't show you this slide yet. Hopefully I will be able to in the future, but what this is based on from academics, from professionals in this field, it's based on UN figures given, and it's based on Ukrainian official loss figures. So the figures that they've taken in to have that outcome, that it could shrink to 10 million before the end of the century, is likely using optimistic numbers in the beginning. So what we can see here with the war termination theory that I presented to you earlier, if you have forgotten here, that the more the state has sacrificed, the less willing it is to accept a peace deal that doesn't seem to justify those losses, is why I believe this war will continue on in a grinding attrition and just deteriorate not only the front line, but it'll deteriorate the power of both of these nations and the patience that people have with them as well, where in the end we'll have both sides looking back and asking, when was the point that peace should have been made? Because it's got worse and worse and worse. And we've already seen an example of this, that the peace proposed in 22 was better than a realistic peace that's being proposed now and has then shrunk since then. And could we see, as I refer to then, attritional warfare leading to then a bankruptcy theory of it attrits until it falls off a cliff? We don't know. We don't have a crystal ball, but it seems like we have a crystal ball recently because we use common sense and that we actually treat that things aren't just the dumb country in the east that can't adapt. And that's referring to how Russians see Ukraine and how Ukraine see Russians also. If you just think your enemy is a bumbling, blundering idiot, you are going to assess things wrong, and in the future it's going to end up very poorly for your strategic overlook, maybe not your tactical. And most people online hate me because I actually treat people in these countries, because the other side, whichever you agree, because I treat them like human beings and I think they should be treated as such. I like how that's the way I'm hated. Anyway, legends, you have a fantastic day. I'm going to get back to my weekend, but I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.